what really is driving the valuation of crypto, specifically Bitcoin, and then I'll explain the rest as well. And that'll make a better understanding of where we're going on how we're going to exit this. So now on the screen, you see kind of this line with this rainbow up and down, right? And what you're seeing is this is known as the stock to flow chart. And stock to flow is just simply a financial model that a guy named Plan B, he basically took the financial model and he compared it to, or laid it on top of Bitcoin to see how accurate it was. And the accuracy of this model is so high that you can almost start to make plans around it. And this is really one of the things that I look at from a long-term perspective that I think logically makes sense and obviously mathematically makes sense. And you can Google this later. You can look into this. None of this is actually my work. I'm simply referencing Plan B's work here. But what you're looking at here is a chart of the Bitcoin price, right? And when you look at the Bitcoin price in the colors, right? So you see it starts as yellow, kind of goes green, then blue, then orange, then yellow, then green, then blue, right? It has kind of this different color variation, this rainbow approach. But then on the far right, you actually go out and you see this teal line that continues to go up, but we're not there yet. That's 2023, 2024, 2025. And it's saying eventually it's going to be worth $1 million. How could he possibly say that? Okay, and I've got another video all about stock to flow, but let me kind of run through the basics one more time so everybody's up to speed. When you look at an asset, there's only so much of that asset. When you have a fixed supply asset, like gold, for example, the reason gold is valuable is because there's only so much of it, right? It's a finite supply, and that is known as the stock, right? And so that's fine, but how do I get the valuation of that? Well, I compare it to the flow or the rate at which I can acquire that. So long ago, there was gold nuggets just all over the earth, and people were kind of like, oh, what's this? This is gold. Okay, I'll pick it up and I'll, save it or use it or whatever, right? But eventually they stopped stumbling over gold and they actually said, hey, this valuable thing, I think it's in the earth and we got to go dig for it. So then they went and spent their time, their resources, which would be time and maybe some labor here, to go and dig into the earth. And that process evolved into digging into mountainsides and making caves and having whole entire gold mining operations until modern day, where they have these massive unearthing machines that come and take giant chunks of the earth. They put it on conveyor belts and they shake it out just to find these tiny little nuggets, right? Okay, so the value piece of this is there's all the gold in the world is the stock. The flow is the rate at which I acquire it. So early on in time, the people who were walking around and they found a piece of gold, how much resources did it really require to do that? Really not much. And so they were able to acquire gold at a pretty fast rate, right? And it caused a massive increase in the supply that was available to everybody. But over time, it got harder and harder and harder to find that supply. And so they had to spend more money, spend more time, spend more effort and energy to acquire it. And the only reason they would ever consider spending all that time, energy, and effort would be if the smaller amount of gold they found was still worth something, right? You wouldn't go spend $1 million just to find a gold nugget worth $100,000. That would be ridiculous. But what they know is, because it is a valuable asset, I simply need to uncover or unmine the rest of the supply. So what ends up happening is it requires more and more resources to acquire the rest of that gold, for example, in this story here. And the rate at which you're acquiring it over time compared to the stock is what is help deriving its value. Okay. And a good example of this that I always talk about is Elon Musk said he found a meteor or something like this in space that's solid gold. And he had made some comment one time about, I'm going to go up, I'm going to get this gold thing, this gold meteor, I'm going to bring it down and it'll crash the entire gold market. And the problem with that is it defies the logic and the math behind the stock to flow. Because how would you first of all go get that? Well, he's got rockets, of course. He could send some rockets up, but how much money does it cost to send a rocket up there? Right? And the fuel and all this other stuff. Then once you get the gold, how much can you really put on that spacecraft before bringing it back down without making it too heavy? So you got to take all these trips, which require resources, which would then drive the value of that additional gold higher and higher, because it has to be worth more than it would cost to acquire. So that's the story of stock to flow. And I tell you that because Bitcoin's the exact same way. There are 21 million Bitcoin, and that's all there will ever be. And early on, there was an incentive for if you were mining Bitcoin, which is the process of managing the transactions, right? So if I want to send you Bitcoin, that's a transaction that someone else is going to validate. And those validators are called miners, right? And those miners are going to spend energy to run computers. And those computers are going to do all the cryptographic computational math to be able to figure out that you are who you say you are and I am who I am, right? And that we're trying to do something together here. Well, the only reason you or anybody else would ever spend electricity running a computer to accomplish this thing is if you were rewarded with something. And in this case, the miners are rewarded with Bitcoin. And early on, they were given this much Bitcoin for a 4-year period to be able to do that, right? And so it was going to be worth something. But the way that Bitcoin is lined out is that it mimics the stock to flow, meaning that we can't just keep giving you the same amount of Bitcoin over time, because that's just like printing more money. The more money I print, the less value the dollars you have now actually have, because all I've done is just create something out of nothing, right? Well, when we talk about Bitcoin, now I'm in the position to where if the miners are getting, let's just say 20 to keep the math easy. Let's say they get 20 Bitcoin if they solved all of the transactions and confirmed all the transactions in each block that is produced. And if they're given 20, the way that the system is set up is that in 4 years there's going to be a halving. And that halving means that the mining reward goes from 20 to half, which is 10. And so now they're literally being paid half as much in order to do the same amount of work. Their energy cost didn't go down, right? And so in order for them to even consider doing this, the price of the asset would have to go up, mimicking this stock to flow, right? And that's kind of how we get to this conversation. When you're looking at this stock to flow chart, now that you understand kind of this stock to flow model, right? And again, I've got a deeper explanation on another video you can go look up. But when you're looking at this, what you see is that this halving event happens for Bitcoin. And if you're wondering about other coins, there's a reason I'm focusing on Bitcoin first, and it's because it controls the majority of the market share. And so just like the tide in the ocean, when the tide rises, it takes all the ships with it, right? And so when Bitcoin moves, it kind of impacts everything else at this point in time. In the future, that's not really going to be the case. But we'll talk about that at a later date. When you're looking at this chart, what happens is there's a halving date. Well, when all of a sudden people start getting paid half as much, they don't panic and just start selling everything and getting out of it. And there's this kind of this ramp up period. And so when you see on the chart here that down here at the bottom, that there's this big spike in price, and then it kind of rides along that true value line, which is that teal blue line, that it would be considered the fair value of Bitcoin, according to this stock to flow model. And so since this last halving, which was in May of 2020, the true value of Bitcoin is going to be about $100,000 starting sometime this year-ish, right? Like we should be getting around there this year. My personal opinion, and it is an opinion, is that we'll probably see $100,000 Bitcoin by September 1st, right? Now, what's crazy about that right now is we just had this big run up to 64,000, and then now it's down in the 30s again. And so it psychologically doesn't make sense to say, how can something go and double and triple in value? But you're forgetting that we went from 10 grand to 64 grand in like 5 months. And so it's very, very possible to triple, right? And so the fair value line is kind of what I'm looking at. But what I really want to point out is kind of these peaks. You see how at a certain point it has kind of these weird peaks? Well, these peaks are really this psychological piece, the emotional level of uneducated money is the nice way I say it, right? These are people who don't know what they're investing in, but they're getting in to see the number go up. Guess what? I'm one of these people. Like, I totally understand where you're at. And crypto's only been around for about, well, this version of crypto's only been around about since 2008, right? 2009. And so it's still so new in its infancy. It doesn't seem like that because it's been over a decade, but I'm telling you, when it comes to terms of money, this is very much in its infancy. And what we're seeing is a lot of uneducated people say, I want exposure to this. We're seeing larger companies say the same thing, and so they jump in. Well, when we get closer to the end of this 4-year cycle, what you're going to see is a lot of people jumping in when we get close to the fair value or over the fair value. And once we hit $100,000, they will have seen it go from $10,000 to $100,000 in 1 year. And you know what they're going to want to do? They got to get a piece of this. I got to throw some money at this thing just in case it goes to $1 million. Because sadly on YouTube, there are people who would be like, it'll be $200,000 there, and someone's going to inevitably be like, listen, it's going to go to $1 million. And this is really a misunderstanding of the fundamentals and the technical analysis that comes with cryptocurrency. But even though I'm talking on YouTube right now, please don't take financial advice from any YouTuber. It's not really a smart decision, right? And so what we're looking at is we're looking at the emotional swings of people putting money in. And so we can, in another video, I'll explain why we can kind of time the bottom of the market, but it's really difficult to time the top of the market because you don't know how many new people are going to be jumping in and how much capital is going to be flowing into the market at that time, causing these big swings. But we can get pretty darn close. There are psychological levels to everything, right? If I was talking about the stock market, if I was talking about gold, there is a price to which I can get you to buy it, and there's a price to which I can get you to sell it, right? And that's any asset. And so that's kind of what this chart really shows, and it really helps to paint a better picture for where we're going in the long run.